Hi everybody, thank you for joining me on the first session of the last day. I mean, it's been exhausting days and you made it here by this time. Thank you. Welcome to Just Enough Administration and how we make this thing great. I'm not sure about the again part, but we'll be getting there anyway. So before we delve into the details, many thanks, a big shout out to our sponsors. Without their help, none of this would have happened, none of us would be here. A bit on me, I'm Fred. I'm a cloud solution architect at Microsoft, previously known the role as Premier Field Engineer, and I deal a lot with security and automation, which kind of makes JEA a perfect hit for me, which is why I'm kind of into that. So, what are we going to look at today? We are going to look at how can we make the creation part less toilsome, how we can streamline this, maybe even do a JEA release pipeline out of the whole thing, something that is easy to do and not painfully handcrafted. How we can then manage those that we actually have in the field, like not have them standalone islands that we have to manually investigate. Is there something there? Is there nothing there? If there's something there, what is there? How can I remove it, do an update, whatever. And then we're going to deploy this at scale, because this is really one of the big pain points that has never been answered yet before by Microsoft. How are we going to do that? Now, Just Enough Administration. You heard about it. It's great. It allows you to delegate sensitive tasks to somebody who is not supposed to have sensitive privileges. Specifically, it allows us to grant access to a process rather than a privilege to a system. Typical example, I have a helpdesk user that is supposed to help the regular users on their terminal servers. Now, he's supposed to be able to see who is logged on where. He's supposed to be able to log off hanging sessions and maybe restart the spooler service, because we all know how stable and reliable the spooler service is. Now for this, if you give him traditional system rights, we need to give that helpdesk user local admin to all of our terminal server farm, which is probably more than we're willing to give him. On the other hand, having the helpdesk user escalate every single request to us senior admins so we do it for him because he doesn't have the rights is something we get tired before the first day is over. So, JEA looks like the right thing. It's a security tool. We might first want to start with hitting the docs. So we get started on the website. It's all documented. How do I craft the thing? So we hit the docs, and we hit the docs some more, and we hit the docs. And there's even more docs, and more hitting docs. And at some point, after we have gone through this entire stack of things, we have a working JEA endpoint. Yes! The proof of concept in my lab has worked. But, yeah, what now? Because this is the point where the docs stop. They have some references to desired state configuration, which is kind of nice, but not something everybody has deployed, so we can easily just add this there. So what are we going to do? Well, at this point, it's time to start the magic. So, first of all, I need a little bit of something. I have a helper function. I'm not going to delve into the details. It's going to create a new Active Directory role, add me to that role, kill my Kerberos cache so that my group membership works immediately, and at some point, the screen share is actually going to work. Thank you for pointing that out. Hello, and duplicate. Please give me the screen. Hello? This is not what's supposed to happen in here. I already was wondering what the demo gods were going to do to me, so given that I have kind of tried out the code, now I know. More screen? It doesn't. Fortunately, tech support is already at hand. Thank you. And it totally was not just unplugging and replugging the cable. So there we are. You can now see I've got a helper function that makes sure that I am a member of the groups that I'm going to authorize to connect to the JEA endpoint and make sure that actually exists so tests can proceed. So let's start with the starting point. How can we optimize the creation process? Now, this whole thing needs a PowerShell module called G-Analyzer. It is my toolkit all around JEA. There is a lot of powerful tools in there. This has started as a collaboration project with Miriam Wiesner, who is now a security researcher at Microsoft, and it is designed to help us deploy JEA endpoints, build JEA endpoints, and help us avoid shooting ourselves in the foot while we do that. That last part is something that we occasionally forget to do. Again, not speaking from personal experience here. So we are going to want to allow a few things. Get win event for troubleshooting, like accessing the event log. I want to allow get service to see what is the service state. And then I want to allow that particular group to restart the spooler service and only the spooler service. So we are going to need a new JEA module, which is one of the commands from there. I give it a name. Let's call it service admin. And I am done with that. I could add more description. Okay, let's add a description. Administrate services. And that's it. Now this module is basically an empty shell, and we need to fill it with the actual permissions, what we are going to allow. So I need get win event. I need get service. And finally, I need the restart service command, but with some constraints where this new JEA command comes in, which builds me that information. What parameters allowed, what values are you allowed to provide to it to further constrain the command that we're whitelisting. So, yep, that warning is okay the first time it scans. New JEA command is going to give you a bloody warning if you're trying to expose invoke expression or something like that, which would usually be considered a bad idea. So we now add a new JEA role. That JEA role requires a module. It requires a name, admins, and it requires an identity, what group is allowed to do this. So I'm going to go with contoso JEA underscore dash service manager. This group doesn't exist yet, which is where that little help command is coming in, new JEA lab group name. Yes, loading the function first leads to better function running experiences. There we are. Oh no. Domain local. And we have now created that group. We are able to now add that role. And our module is ready for deployment. Module, export, JEA module, path, presentation route. And we now have here a PowerShell module that contains all the logic that a JEA endpoint needs. It also comes with a register command that is name-specific auto-generated to the module, which calls internally the actual register command that is going to install this on your machine. The installation process of a JEA endpoint is ultimately just registering the session configuration. But there are problems associated with that. First of all, there might already be a JEA session with that name installed, the previous version that I'm trying to override. So I first check that it's available and unregister it. Then there's the next thing. When we register a JEA endpoint, it is going to restart the WinRM service. So all sessions will be disconnected. There is one gotcha here. In about 50% of the cases in my test lab, the restart will not work and the WinRM service is going to remain down. This is obviously not an ideal user experience if you now want to test your JEA endpoint or do anything else with this machine. So what we are doing now is we set up a scheduled task that is going to run a system and start the service. It's going to wait 1 minute or 30 seconds, not quite sure what I told it here. I tell it PowerShell exa, command, okay, sleep for 60 seconds, start WinRM service, and then remove yourself from the scheduled task, from the task schedule. So the task is going to self-deleting. You won't have any remaining traces. And then, finally, we register the PS session configuration. We're now good to go. So in order for this to work properly, there is one big gotcha. We now need to move this module under C program files Windows PowerShell modules. Otherwise, this is not going to work out quite well. So copy item path presentation root JEA _ and my memory is again lousy, so let's look that up, service admin. And we're going to do this path, destination, C program files, Windows PowerShell, modules. Don't forget the recurse, otherwise it is again a suboptimal experience. And finally, we call the register JEA endpoint _ JEA service admin command, which is now a publicly available command, so this should give me intelligence on that. And I did a magnificent job here. Actually, Fred, did you not prepare? No, you did not prepare. Yes, if you have not registered PowerShell 7 remoting, you should not be trying to register JEA endpoint in PowerShell 7. Font size, Fred. (24), and still it's available there, so we can do that part here. Nothing special to see here. It should now just return, and our JEA endpoint is ready to roll. So I can now enter PS session, computer name localhost, and configuration name JEA _ service admin. Okay. There we are. And with get command, we can see we have get service, we have get win event, we have the default JEA commands, and we have a function called restart service. And restart service will now only take the name parameter, and it will only accept spooler or force. If I try to do this, typo doesn't matter in this case because it immediately hit the validate set. I am not allowed to do that. So we have that JEA endpoint running, it's working, and we didn't have to craft all of these files by hand. Now, there are a few things about JEA endpoints that we're supposed to not do. Notably, there are some commands that are harmful that are usually a bad idea to expose. If you're going to limit what the user is allowed to do, allowing invoke expression is start process is also difficult. There are a few more gotchas that we are going to look in because not all of them are obviously harmful at the first look. So we have a command that is going to parse a script of a script file and pick up every single command in there and see whether it would be harmful to expose. This is a best effort thing. We are trying to do this right, but I cannot promise that it catches everything. So still, use your head for that. Get sim instance is usually harmless, right piece of message, I hope as well. On the other hand, there are some things that are really a bad idea. So don't do this. If you try to build a JEA endpoint with this command, it's going to at least give you a warning. Are you really sure you want to do this? We can also scan a script block, whether there's any logic in there. That's problematic. And sometimes, we have here a good example, we are not quite catching everything. I've created an issue, and I'm going to fix that after this conference. But remove item looks harmless, right? I mean, it's just working with files. As a virtual admin, we could then remove critical system files or, for example, security policy files from the local store. So don't. So not every result is automatically catching every possible permutation. Use your brain. Use caution where you can. It can be something of a help, however, to give you a first filtering. So, that's nice. But there is this one thing, this is still too much manual labor. This was too much toil for me. I don't want to do this again this way. So, we are going to do the same thing in fast forward. I'm copying, I'm just going to reuse the same module because I'm lazy and ignoring all the other parts. Actually, no, yes, yeah, no. Okay, let's go with this one. We have a module ready to roll. So how about we install JEA module it? Okay, before the tab completion works, I'm going to type it myself. We have some computer names, and I'm just going to tell it get ID computer, filter wildcard. I want all computers in my domain to be running this. I hope they're actually turned on. Would be great. There we are. It's now on every single machine in the domain. At least I'm pretending it is that. No. How do you prove that? I can, first of all, see whether it will actually allow me to enter PS session into a remote host. That would be nice. JEA configuration name JEA_service admin. Yes, I really should have stuck with the default PowerShell version for this one. Oh, yes. And there we are. Another computer already has the JEA endpoint, and I was able to access it and pick that up. So that's great. But we still need a bit more toys in there. So let's go ahead and deploy something else. I need a new module, new JEA module, name OS info. I now add a new role to that has only one piece of information, and that is we have a function here. This is a nice function. Imagine it would be actually good with help and everything, and we'd be doing something useful. But I can now copy that path and provide that path to new JEA role. And we'll then take that function script file and wrap it into that module that we're deploying. So if I have my custom commands that I want to expose, it's easy. OS info, module, and identity. I'm just going to go with service admin because I'm lazy. I should have done that right away. Oh, JEA dash service admins. Please tell me that's what I called them. Service manager. Great. Da-da-da. There we go. New role. And our module is ready to roll. So I'm going to install JEA module in the computer name GRDZ. Come on, you can do it. Great. Now, I'm not going to actually execute the connect in this machine, but I'll have this stored here. So we have it in the materials because that's going to be part of the GitHub where all the session materials are in. Exit, enter, and get OS info. Oh, what happened here? This is one of the first problems we hit when we try to deploy custom code. In the context of a JEA session, there is one feature in PowerShell that does not exist, that does not actually not apply. And that feature is automatic import of modules by calling the command. We need to explicitly import that module. We could declare it as a dependency of the JEA module, but since this is a built-in Windows module, that would kind of fail when we now try to deploy our JEA endpoints using PowerShell repositories. So we have a separate option, and that is modules to import. And get sim session, I keep forgetting what the actual module was. Get command, get sim instance. Yes, Fred, typos are not helpful. Sim cmdlets. Okay, sim cmdlets. Add that. Install it again. And since we've got the unregistering and the overwriting and everything, it's just going to replace the current deployment. And I can now enter paste session into that. And now it will be loading the simcmdlets module. So get OS info. Now works. So, yep, I deployed it to every single machine in the domain. I'm saying that. But how do we know that Fred is actually talking the truth here? Now, we need some tools to figure out what do we actually have deployed on the target system. For that, we have a command called getJEAEndpoint, which you can point at a specific computer or at all computers. And it is going to give me all of the endpoints that are deployed on that machine. So let's grab them and investigate a bit further. We now know what JEA endpoint is there. We also know whether it is whether it has a description, whether it's a version, whether it is actually JEA deployed with that, G-Analyzer deployed. We will also find JEA endpoints that I did not deploy with the toolkit. But what we also have in there, hidden in a very, very well hidden capable part called roles, is we have every single role that was deployed, which command is being exposed, and where it's coming from. This one has a few more. So we have more commands. Let's take a look at what the actual object looks like when we disable the formatting override. We have all of the definitions there. And yes, Fred, you should be keeping that in. We have visible CMDlets, which we are exposing. And, well, for that, we get exactly what command, what's in there. And, well, the specific constraints of the restart service command that we're exposing. Display here is something I'm going to refine, that it's a bit more easy to access. But basically, we have access to every single thing we're exposing. We don't have access to the actual source code, so we still have to investigate custom commands that we don't realize. But with this, we can now look into it and see what's going on there. Of course, there is also, when we can find something, we can manage it. Wouldn't it be great if we could just uninstall JEA modules and tell it to also remove the code? It's gone. Nothing is there anymore. If I now try to enter PS session here, we don't have that configuration anymore. So we can deploy, we can analyze, we can uninstall. But at this point, we're still kind of in the self-service area where we have to actively push. We have to depend on the machine being available. We have to, well, do the work ourselves at our own time. We're still the bottleneck here. I kind of would like to be able to just pass that off to somebody who has more time, like an Intune manager, SCCM, or group policy. So, yes, let's take this module that we just had, which is the OS info one. And now I'm going to do something that I'm very much enjoying. Export JEA module, you remember that. It requires a path, which is the presentation root. And it has a parameter called as bootstrap. As bootstrap is an option to export this whole thing into a single PS1 file. This is now an absolutely one item we have here in the presentation root, JEA OS info. There is a lot of base 64 string. And at the bottom, there is some logic that is going to convert this, create a temp folder, unwrap it, run the bootstrap script that is included, and remove all the temp items. And what this will do is it's going to do all the steps that we did right now, including setting up the JEA endpoint, registering everything, putting the modules in the right part. If I need dependent modules, I could also include the dependent modules with that. This was another parameter on the bootstrap part. And thus, I can now invoke command. Let's go back to the presentation script so I don't actually mess this up from keeping it from the docs. Invoke command, computer name, GRDZ, file path. There we go. Yep, that's perfectly fine. Remote deployment of JEA endpoints will generate a warning and usually an error because restarting the WinRM before reclosing it is something that happens. But let's see, we're in again. And this script content you can deploy to pretty much any package manager that supports deploying PowerShell scripts. Those are usually constrained to giving you provide this one file that you're allowed to deploy with that. And with this, our entire JEA endpoint becomes that one file. Yes? the question was, is literally everything in there, not just the JEA code or the configuration files, but even dependent modules? The answer is yes. Everything is in there. This file can get really, really large, depending on what kind of module you ship with that. And in the case of some boot runners, you might hit size limitations with that, if they include them. But let's just say it's usually survivable from a total part. The bootstrap, including PS Framework, for example, would be 2.5 megabytes of file size. That's still something you should be able to handle. So, this leaves us with one last deployment mechanism, group policy. This is usually the other half of the attendees that are still on-prem and have to deal with that. Can't afford much of infrastructure or just don't have access to that. Group policy is still very much a thing. So what can we do with group policy? Well, group policy itself is well out of scope for G-Analyzer. It's completely beyond what it is in focus for it. But there is another project of mine called the Server Configuration Manager. The Server Configuration Manager is fully documented on GitHub and in the PS Gallery for a module project, and with a few more gimmicks coming after this session. It basically has you deploying a group policy with a scheduled task that launches a launcher script that is provided by the toolkit. And that launcher script is told to look into this folder for configuration that tells it what it is supposed to do. It, well, allows you to provide script blocks that work kind of like WMI filters. So like this configuration set applies to you, this does not apply to you. And then you can provide actions that it's supposed to do. So with this, you can deploy by group policy, PowerShell modules, or JEA endpoints, or whatever else you write a plugin for. Those are the two that I provide out of the box. Now, setting this whole thing up can be a bit complicated. The documentation will run you through it. But I now had to build this bootstrap logic for JEA. So I decided, hey, why not also build a bootstrap logic for the Server Configuration Manager? For that, I have this nice little bootstrap script here that is neither nice nor little. And I'm just going to run this. Preparing all the thing. Now it wants the path where all machines are going to look for configuration and the action logic and, well, the logic that it describes, does this apply to me or does this not apply to me? So I have this path prepared. It should be a network share. No thread, Control V does not work here. We also need the repository, because we now need an internal repository. It can accept a NuGet server. I don't have one in my lab, so I'm going to just go ahead with a file share again for that, to do file-based PowerShell repositories. Thread, this Control V habit does not work here. Okay, we need a repository name. I'm just going to call it Contoso. And then it asks me whether I want to register this, which I will need if I want to publish all the modules that I need into that repository. So yes, I'm going to register this on my local machine. I am going to publish the relevant module. And I am going to publish PS Resource Get. So I can deploy and use the latest PowerShell Get version on all of the clients, so they're not stuck on PowerShell Get 101, which is kind of a crime against PowerShell humanity. So then we have this bootstrap script this launcher script that we need to deploy on the per group policy. This I write to sysvol, because sysvol usually means it has the least restrictions on actual script execution, so it's the safest way to go about that. And then we get instructions on what we are supposed to do in the group policy. Just setting up that task, and we are good to go. There's just this one problem. Again, demo gods and all that, and I just realized this morning that PowerShell Resource Get, which I enthusiastically migrated to, well, it does not support SMB shares. There is a slight problem in the file path resolution. I am going to do a pull request on that to fix this in the weekend, but that part of the demo I really can't execute here, so we can't see that wandering over by group policy. Apologies about that. What I can show is what the whole thing is looking like. We have on the one side the modules that we published on the share. So those would now be available to the targets, including all of the other modules that you decide to share there. And on the other side of things, we now have here the sysvol scripts. There's now this SCM launcher that we are rolling out. Other than the repository, we now have the server configuration manager files, which includes the actual actions being implemented. This handles deploying the JEA endpoints. This is the implementing logic. So if you want to know what happens behind the scenes, code review those. They are not monsters, hopefully. Other than that, we have targets. This is a script block that each computer that is running the scheduled task is going to execute to see, does this apply to me or does this not apply to me? So you can provide your own determination logic based on naming, based on whatever. And finally, we have some configuration parts where we need to add a folder for the, no, actually not JEA. We need a folder for, I'm going to deploy this to all machines. And then we need a new file, JEA_OSInfo .psd1, yes. And then open with VS Code. It's an empty file, and I didn't really want to do this by hand while you're all watching, so I have an example configuration for that we can copy over. We're basically telling it, this is the name, OSInfo. It applies to all. It is a JEA endpoint action, and it only needs one parameter, and that is the name of the JEA endpoint. And if this action is executed on a target machine, it will look in the SCM folder for the latest version of our endpoint and apply it if it is a newer version than what is already applied. So it is an automatically update of all of our JEA endpoints that we deploy to that folder, unless we also specify the parameter for minimum version and maximum version, so we can version constrain it in a config if we want. And of that, it's just a matter of waiting until the scheduled task triggers on the machines, and they will have the latest version. Yes?
Do we have some kind of logging logic where we can see if it's executed?
Do we have some kind of logging logic to see how the SCM executes, whether the JEA endpoint is being deployed and everything? The answer to that is yes, we do. Let's see what that actually looks like. We have the SCM launcher right here. So we have event log entries for every single thing that's happened. They're documented. What does the event mean? We're logging to the Windows event log. And it's exactly there where I will update the documentation if new events come in. You're asking me things. Is it a separate log or is it a dedicated thing? We have a dedicated log, Server Configuration Manager, under the application scope with the source SCM launcher as described. If this fails for whatever reason, we have a default fallback to application, because that exists on every single machine and is something that usually does not generate plenty events by itself, so you can figure that one out. If there's an event ID 666 happening there, you might have a problem. Yes? How to implement the versioning of the modules. This is something we can do in the JEA endpoint versioning. When we do a new JEA module, it also has the version number. This is wrapped as a PowerShell module with that version number inside, and it is also registered to the documentation setting on the PS session configuration, which is where get JEA endpoint will then grab the version information to figure out what version do we have. Another question, yes?
Can I run the Geo module under another user?
Yes, you can. You can switch to. First of all, question: can we use switch the JEA endpoint to, instead of this virtual admin account, to use either a constrained virtual admin account or a group managed service account? And the answer to that is yes. We do have parameters for both. Either service account, provide a service account name, or there should also be. Okay, I did not do a parameter on the command yet for the other one, but the module. First of all, let's finish that node. The module object should have a virtual. Okay. Ta-da. It should support that. I'll need to look it up. Yes.
Does the G-Analyzer module, does this have to be installed on all? So do I roll out my bootstrap file, or is it enough if I have it on the
All right. Question was, do we need to roll out G-Analyzer and all of its dependencies onto every single machine using this, or can I keep that on my admin machine that's building everything? This is only for your admin machine. Only when you build the thing, whatever you produce from this is completely independent from G-Analyzer. The output module by itself has absolutely zero dependency on any other module unless you personally specify it, which you can by using the required module parameter and providing the modules that you want. Anything else?
A simple copy of the module is not possible. It's always needed to register.
Simply copying the module, is that enough, or do we always need to run register? We absolutely must run register, because otherwise the WinRM service is not going to know about it. You don't have to use the provided register command. You can register the PS session configuration manually by literally calling register PS session configuration by yourself. So if you have another deployment process you want to tie that into, nobody is forcing you to actually call the register command. But it still needs to be registered into WinRM. Well, yes?
The default credential under which is the module running,
All right, the question was, when we connect to it by default, is the account running the code on the JEA endpoint, the local system? The answer is no. By default in JEA, whether you use G-Analyzer or not, you run with a virtual local admin account. It creates a temporary account for you that performs the action. That virtual account is local admin unless you further restrict it. And that virtual admin is clearly identifiable and mappable to the user doing the connection. It will have the correct SID with some modifications, but you can identify the SID that connected and you can identify the account. So all the event logs that are being caused have the correct username in there so you can track who did things. Which is the disadvantage when you go to the group managed service route, because in this case there's a dedicated service account executing things, so all the logs on the target machine are being caused by that service account and not by the user connecting. On the benefits side, using our GMSA allows you to access domain resources because the virtual account is a pure local account to the target machine. So if you need to execute things like creating a new Active Directory user, connecting to the SharePoint farm, accessing the credential safe on the other server that requires Windows authentication, those are all actions you need an AD account for, and this is where GMSAs come in. Yes?
I think you also can enable transcripts with your...
You can enable transcripting, correct. Yes, for logging purposes, you can enable transcripts, which will then transcript everything that happens in that session. From a logging perspective, I would generally recommend instead going for script block logging, because that is auto log rotating and safe. Yes?
Is there a chance that will work with SSH remotely?
will there be a chance to support SSH remoting? The answer is I don't know. I have never tried. It might be, it might not be, but I honestly can't tell at this point. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining me this early morning. If you want to talk more about this, you know where to find me, which is somewhere around here, probably drinking something and bragging about my toys. So, yeah, always happy to do more of that.